We've been talking in the last couple of videos about managing operations. But before we can dive in and look at how to manage operations, we are going to need to figure out what is involved in operations. So let's look at what is operations. The purpose of operations within a company is to add value. And we add value by transforming having technical difficulties here by transforming inputs into outputs. So a company goes from a set of materials. So this is the building, this is your workers, any machines you may have, any information you have. You're taking these inputs and you're turning them into some kind of output, some kind of good or service. So for example, Coca-Cola is going to take water, caramel coloring, a plastic bottle, their labels, their formula. They're going to take that and they're going to transform it into a good, which is a can of Coke. Okay. A hair salon is going to take the chair, the scissors, the hairstylist, all these different components, and the output will be a haircut. So operations is adding value by transforming these inputs into outputs. So we end up with some kind of product, some good or service. And there are different ways that companies can transform or add value. So when we talk about value added, we're talking about the difference between cost of input and the price we sell it for. So how do we go from the value of the raw materials to the price the customers are willing to pay? We need a way to add value to that different good or service. So there's different ways to add that value, different types of transformations. So the first type of transformation is what we call a physical transformation. This is what we do in manufacturing. So if you are Coca-Cola and you are taking that water and that caramel coloring, sugar, and you are turning it into a new product to create something new out of it, then you are doing a physical transformation. And that's what we see in manufacturing. But not all companies make stuff. Maybe your company transforms or adds value locationally. So a company that is adding value through location would be a company that is a warehouse or provides transport. So if you're a DHL, UPS, FedEx, your transformation, your value added is locational. You move the product from one location to another. You didn't make it. It's not a physical transformation. You're simply moving it. There are other ways to add value. We have exchange. This is what is done in retail. You didn't make it, so it's not physical. You're not even moving it. Okay? What it is you are providing access for your customers in an area near them. So if you think about the Gap, for example, the Gap didn't make it. They could even have other companies move it. And their value added is that they are making it available to the customer where the customer is. Okay. Other types of transformation, we have physiological. Okay. Physiological is where we are changing the body. Okay, so for example, healthcare. So if you're changing the body, it's physiological. If you're changing the mind, it's psychological. So when we look at the entertainment industry, movies make you laugh, make you cry, change the way you think about things. The value added is psychological, changes the mind. Whereas physiological, healthcare, beauty salons, right? If they make your skin smoother, brighter, if they fix the broken arm, the value added there is changing the body, and it's physiological. And then the last type of transformation is informative. This would be for industries that focus on communication. So if you are a local news channel, you are the newspaper, okay, you're providing information. So the value added is that your customer now has access to knowledge and information they didn't have before. Then it's an informative transformation. So as we look at different businesses, we want to look at what transformation are they providing? How are we getting from inputs to outputs? Okay. Why is it that customers are willing to pay for it? So there's got to be a difference between the people, the employees, the materials being used, and what people are willing to pay for it. And so what extra value are you providing? Okay. We're going to come back to these transformations later this semester, so it's really important that you hang on to this list for the later levels. So Coca-Cola and the hair salon were examples we looked at a minute ago. So Coca-Cola would be a physical transformation, whereas the hair salon would be physiological. It is possible for a company to provide multiple types of transformation. So if you're really pushing that not just the hair salon, your hair is cut, but the spa experience, right? So if that spa experience is really about a meditative, tranquil place, we can start looking at, okay, are we changing the mind? So is it psychological as well? Maybe your company is focused on, well, for example, if you are Walmart, you own your own supply chain. So you are both the warehousing, transport, and the retail. Okay. And then the question becomes, do you have others in your supply chain who are making the product, or are you also making the product yourself? So it is possible for companies to provide multiple types of transformation. Typically, you'll have a primary one in terms of how the value is added. In all the transformations, we end up with an output that is a good or a service. And so then the question becomes, what are we talking about when we talk about goods and services? What are they? Well, you remember, hopefully, from economics, then we talk about goods. These are tangible things, that is, we can touch them, that people want. So goods are tangible things that people want, and then services are going to be the intangible. So goods, that's a can of Coca-Cola. Services, intangible, okay? And so in that case, we're talking more like the haircut, okay? So we've defined goods and we've defined services. Now, it's quite possible that your company provides a combination of both. So, for example, when you go and get your oil changed, there is both the service, that is, they are removing your old oil and putting your new in, but there's also the good, that is the container of oil that is now in your car. So we can look at companies in terms of, are they more goods or are they more services, since it's often a combination of both. So companies that are a high percentage goods and lower percentage service would be the ones that we typically think of when we think of manufacturing, steel making, automobile manufacturing. Now, it's possible that companies like automobile manufacturers like Ford also provide services, right? You have warranty, you have leasing, you have financing options, those types of things provide a service. So companies are a combination, but we can have companies be predominantly more goods. Or on the other extreme, we can have companies that are predominantly service with a very low level of goods. So for example, in teaching, right, mostly I'm providing a service in terms of passing on knowledge, right? So here we have our informative transformation. There's a low percentage of goods because you do take away things with you afterwards. You may have documents, files, papers, books, and of course the diploma, right? So there can be goods and services combined. And it really is a continuum because businesses are in between. They can be more goods, more services, and all the options in between. So the question becomes, what do we predominantly do in Canada? Do we predominantly make more goods? Do we predominantly provide more services? Which one do we fall into? Well, if we look at the number of jobs, what we find when it comes to jobs is that we are predominantly services. So about 75% of the jobs in Canada are in services. Okay. If we look at GDP, gross domestic product, that is the value of what we make, we also find that the total value of what we make is also in services. So 72% of the total value, the GDP, total value of all the goods and services in Canada, 72% is services, whereas 2% is agriculture and 24% mining, construction, and manufacturing. So we predominantly do services. And really, when we look at our businesses, we're really on this end of a high percentage service, low percentage goods when you think about the companies that we have. And for many of you, what you're going to go into is a job that is primarily service focused. So then we need to look at these other types of transformation, because when we look at manufacturing, then we're here in that physical transformation. But the rest of these here are really that service sector. So why does it matter? Why does it matter whether your company makes goods or services when we're looking at the operations of a company? Well, the operations and the tools we're going to learn this semester are very similar whether you provide a good or a service. Okay. What's different is how things are done. So it's similar in terms of what is done. You still need to manage location, logistics, capacity planning, forecasting, and so on. But how you do those things changes somewhat when we look at the difference between goods and services. So let's dive into that a bit deeper. So identify which one is more likely to have customer contact, goods or services. Well, likely you said services is more likely to have customer contact, right? If we think about manufacturing, if we're making cans of Coke, then there's not a lot of customer contact between those who are manufacturing and making the cans of Coke and the customer base. Whereas if you are a tailor who is trimming people's clothes, if you're the hair salon, there's a lot of customer contact throughout the entire operations process. What about uniformity of input? So this is the materials that are coming in for us to add value. Well, there's a lot more uniformity of input when we're looking at goods. Because if you think about a can of Coke, every can of Coke should have about the same amount of water going into it, the same amount of plastic in the bottle, same amount of sugar, right? So we have the same inputs in all of them. But services are different. If I go and get a haircut, then I'm going to need hair color. I'm going to need more of it cut off. That might be different based on your hair color, hairstyle, hair length. So we don't need all the same equipment. We don't need the same amount of time from the hairstylist. So there's not uniformity of input when it comes to services. If we skip down to the fourth one, uniformity of output, we can also look at what about that final product, that good or that service. Well, the can of Coke, every can of Coke should look about the same, right? They should be the same size, they should taste the same, there should be uniformity of output. But when we're all coming out of the hair salon, we're all going to look a bit different, right? You may have chosen short, spiky, purple hair. Somebody else might have gotten their hair permed or straightened. So we're all coming out of that hair salon looking different. So there's not that uniformity of output. This makes it a bit challenging when we start to do things like measure quality. Because if we all need different things coming in and we all have different things coming out, it's really hard to measure whether or not you're getting the quality. So for example, a can of Coke, we know what it should taste like, we know how full it should be, we know what color it should be. We can measure quality. Okay, it's a lot easier to do. But if we look at, for example, going to a restaurant, okay, well, we're all going to order different things and there's different ingredients that go into it. How can we measure quality across all of those? The other challenge with services is that there is an ability to address or change the quality as we go. So if you think about it, okay, you go into a restaurant, how do you know if you're getting quality service? Well, did you get what you ordered? Well, what if you didn't get what you ordered? What if what you got is different or cold or no good? What happens? Well, you complain to the wait staff, and how do they make it up to you, right? Maybe they're going to bring you free dessert. Maybe they bring you appetizers. They apologize. They make changes during the operations to try to address the quality issue. Well, why are they doing this? They're trying to make you happy while you're here at the restaurant so that you don't leave the restaurant and then tell all your friends how terrible it is and post bad reviews on Yelp and Google. So the end, when we're trying to look at and measure quality, if we're measuring it based on Yelp reviews and Google reviews, we don't see the quality issues because they tried to resolve them midway through. From a company's perspective, well, they may not get some angry comments from customers, but they will have the extra costs of giving you the extra appetizers or comping your entire meal and things like that. It's really hard to kind of measure whether or not quality is an issue in services because we have that ability to kind of adapt and change. But on the other hand, we have the ability to adapt and change so we can resolve the quality issues before they have a greater impact on our greater customer base and not just the one individual. So when we have uniform input and output, it's very easy to measure quality. We can define it and we can measure it. When it comes to services, because there is that lack of uniformity of input and output, it becomes a lot harder to measure. You can address it midway through, and so it's a little bit harder to kind of see where you're at and are you moving forward in quality. The other thing that uniformity of input and output have an impact on is measurements of productivity. So when we look at productivity, we're looking at how much bang we're getting for our buck. So we want to know is how much value is created per dollar of inputs. So for a good, for example, we could say, okay, the typical worker at the Coca-Cola plant makes 1,000 cans a day. Okay, that we can measure how productive they are. And if we get another employee who comes along who's making less, we know they're less productive. Or if we have one shift that's making less than another, then maybe there's an issue that we need to address. But what about with a service? So if we go back to the hair salon example, my hair takes 3 hours to do, your hair takes 15 minutes. Does that mean your hairstylist is more productive than my hairstylist? Well, because we have that lack of uniformity of inputs and outputs, it's harder to measure what you're getting out of those inputs. Because just because mine takes 3 hours longer than yours, does that mean that a company should only do hairstyles that take 15 minutes? Because then they can see a lot more customers. Right? There's probably a reason that you spend a 3-hour hair session costs a lot more than a 15-minute hair session, right? So measuring productivity can be difficult if we all want something different in terms of the outputs. So we have measuring productivity is much easier with goods. The last thing we want to look at here is the use of labor versus capital, so people versus machines. So the question is, which are you more likely to automate, goods or services? Well, if we can standardize the inputs and we can standardize the outputs, it's a lot easier to have a machine do it, right? So we're more likely to automate the production of goods than we are provision of services. If everything has to be a little bit different for each customer, so a lot of tweaking, then it's a lot easier for it to be done by a person instead of a machine. So services are a lot more likely to be labor intensive, whereas goods are much more likely to be capital intensive. And we can actually see that in the jobs as well, because when we look at layoffs, like in the 2008 recession, the layoffs come in manufacturing because the people can be replaced by automation, by machines. Whereas industries that are more service-based, so healthcare and financial services, they were more likely to hire more people during the 2008 recession than other industries. So we have to look at in our operations, are we going to mechanize? We're going to use machines. And part of that decision is really going to be based on whether we provide mostly goods or mostly services.